Hi everyone, you're back again once more on the main stage with me, Faraha. I hope that you had a chance to grab yourselves a cup of tea. And I am joined on my left by British Sign Language interpreter Rachel Jones. Rachel's pronouns are she, her. She's a mixed race woman in her early 30s and is wearing a black t-shirt. Her hair is long, brown, and straight, and she is sitting in front of a white wall at home. So right now we're going to be playing you a video that is a panel that was led by SWCTN's very own inclusion producer, Jazlyn Pinckney. The panel is based on inclusion, balance, and belonging. So if you have any questions that arise as you're watching the video, please feel free to share them in the chat, and Jazlyn is on hand to take you up in conversation and answer those questions. Hope you all enjoy the video.
Hello, and welcome to the Southwest Creative Technology Network Inclusion Panel. My name is Jazlyn Pinckney, and I am the inclusion producer for the Creative Network. I am a dual heritage woman with dark brown afro hair, but tonight it's in a two-strand twist. I've got gold-rimmed glasses and my lucky dangly pink and gold earrings. I'm so thrilled today to be talking about inclusion and intersectionality and everything in between. I've got two phenomenal guests from around the globe. So I'd like to welcome our first panelist, which is Favianna Rodriguez. Favianna, could you introduce yourself and describe yourself for our audience?
Hello, everyone. I'm Favianna Rodriguez, and I am joining you from Oakland, California. And I am an artist, an activist, and the founder at the Center for Cultural Power. And I am surrounded by plants. I am a plant mom, and I have light brown skin, very curly hair, and big round black glasses. And there's a lot of color around me.
Thank you so much. Abadesi, can I invite you to do the same?
Hi, everyone. I'm Abadesi Osunsade, based here in London. I'm the founder and CEO of Hustle Crew. We are a careers community for the underrepresented in tech, and we're on a mission to make tech more inclusive. So really excited to be here. I am 5'4", standing in front of my bookshelf at home. I have long curly afro hair. I'm mixed race too. I'm wearing bright red lipstick and a soft lilac sweater.
Thank you both so much. I am beyond thrilled to talk to you both. And I kind of have to start off by saying that I'm a huge, humongous fan of both of you. And both of your work in different sort of sectors has massively influenced the way that I approach my practice, but also how I've kind of designed some of the work that we've done at the Creative Network. So massive thank you. And I'm also like totally excited to talk to you both. And we're kind of framing this conversation around what drives social changes in our sectors and the things that we see around us. And how can we inspire or challenge us as individuals, us as a cultural sector, and also business and commerce to be participating in this conversation. So, Favianna, you mentioned that you are the founder of the Center for Cultural Power, and you talk about how you celebrate the power of the artist in this role of social change. Can you talk a little bit about what that means for you?
Yes. Yes. So culture surrounds us all the time. It actually shapes how we think, how we interact with each other, how we view the world. And we are in a time of culture war. Culture is not neutral. It's a battleground. It's a battleground for our imagination. And so if we consider that culture shapes policies, right? So how we treat immigrants, how we treat Black people, Indigenous people throughout the world is all informed by culture, even how we treat the planet. Then it becomes very important to recognize that we're currently living under a worldview that's one of domination and extraction, and really in the service of capitalism, which we know is not a sustainable model for our communities, our people, our countries. And so as artists, as cultural workers, we can help create a different kind of culture. And that culture can be about depicting people of all colors, right? Like depicting us as people who belong, who can thrive. And so it's very, and even around gender, for example, the way that we have portrayed gender, especially as a binary, has been very harmful. I mean, it's actually really led to violence and to unjust laws. And so we have to imagine, how can we move towards equity? right? And so if we want to have a world in which all people, especially Black children, can thrive, then how do they have to see themselves depicted? How do we move away from just showing, in the United States, for example, we have a big problem with often Black people are hardly portrayed. I mean, you hardly can find Black dolls. You hardly can find stories that depict Black, Indigenous, other kids of color. That affects their imagination. And so what would it be like for us to show BIPOC people in many different ways, right? In the same ways, really, that white people are shown. And that is as people in outer space, people in the past, people in fantastical universes. And also, how do we show folks in their full humanity? And so the importance of culture is actually, it's not small, it's very, very significant. And even if we think of today, what's happening in the world, including the response to COVID, it tells us that the old stories are dying, right? I mean, how could it be that in the most developed nations, in the nations that have the most power and the most wealth, that we can't take care of people? In my country, Black and brown people are the most dying of COVID. And if you kind of push back the curtains a little bit, what you realize is that we've been telling a narrative that it's all about money, it's about the economy, and we haven't invested in our healthcare infrastructure. Why? Because we've moved towards privatization, because that's been the story of austerity, which I know folks on the other side of the ocean are very used to. Well, those stories don't work, and those stories actually have led to very harmful realities. And so I like to think about it, what is the opposite of the narratives that don't work? We don't want sexual assault in our world. What is the opposite of that? The opposite of that is stories about consent, right? What is the opposite of race stories? The opposite is stories in which we all thrive and we actually move towards truth, reconciliation, and reparations.
I love what you're saying about building what the yes looks like. That's something that I've taken a lot from the work that you're doing. And I think maybe we can dive into that a little bit later about trying to imagine what positive futures look like and like having that radical reimagination. Abadesi, you work directly with that intersection between tech and business and commerce. How ready is that industry for this kind of change?
I think that's a great question. One of the things that I find is a gap between words and actions. I think this is a very important conversation, the conversation of inclusion, the conversation of increasing representation. In businesses, they're thinking about this, not just from the perspective of making their current employees feel more part of the long term and more part of the mission, but they're also thinking about it in terms of customers and clients, because increasingly those stakeholders also want to hold brands accountable to this work. One of the things that I think is really challenging is sort of building on what Favianna was saying about thinking about culture and the role that that plays in society. One of the things that we're trying to do in our work is actually encourage people to see the world through the lens of systems like capitalism, but also systems like patriarchy and white supremacy, systems of oppression. And it can be really challenging for people to actually take that systemic lens, because part of taking that systemic lens is actually acknowledging your lived experiences and the privileges inherent within that, and unfortunately the role that you are playing in perpetuating these systems of oppression. So what we often find is actually a lot of resistance. It often starts with a bit of denial. No one wants to feel like they've played a role in oppressing other people. But at the same time, we can kind of understand that we are playing a role in perpetuating the status quo wherever we're not actively challenging it. So this is one of the things that we're really trying to do in our work. And I think even the idea of privilege, unfortunately, has been misconstrued in a lot of different arenas where people no longer understand what we mean by that word. Well, in the context of social justice, I'm really talking about those unfair advantages that you get by being a part of, the dominant or maybe norm group. And I think it can be really hard for people to grasp that. And that's why we really try to urge people to understand Kimberlé Crenshaw's work around intersectionality and what she really means when she's asking us to go beyond what you see on face value, whether that's race or gender, but actually think about all of those aspects of someone's lived experiences and how those are intersecting with all sorts of systems, whether it's the healthcare system that Favianna mentioned earlier, the legal system, or the education system. Everything that we're trying to do is effectively like unpack what's happening, what's causing teams to not be diverse by default. And we're trying to create new narratives. And that's really where the struggle is. You know, there are a lot of dominant narratives like meritocracy, the idea that people are where they are because they're the best person for that role. And, you know, that's such a harmful narrative because we know that that's just not the case. So yeah, you know, it's absolutely a journey, but I'm definitely hopeful about what can happen, even if the pace of change is too slow for my liking.
There's a wonderful leader here in the Bay Area. Her name is Shakti Butler. And she said, privilege is the amount of safety that you can access at any given time. So myself as an able-bodied, cisgendered American woman, if I'm outside, I can run, I can use my American privilege, very different than my immigrant and undocumented siblings. I am able-bodied. And so I don't have to consider what the built environment is around me. As a cisgender person, I can tell you absolutely I am safer than many transgender women. And so accessing privilege, even for me as a woman of color, means how am I working to create more safe spaces and advocating and demanding that those who have less privilege than me are able to move in the world as safely as I am. And I think if we consider it in that way through the realm of creating safer spaces, it tends to shift our mindset a bit.
Yeah, I think you both mentioned something that's really important. And also the work that I think we find a lot, especially with this project, the Southwest Creative Technology Network, is people want to be part of this narrative. People want to move towards change, but there is a real nervousness, a fragility, a scaredness around accepting the systems of oppression in which we operate within. How can we encourage people to kind of move in towards that? And what can we do to kind of find the I always think you have to find the reason that it resonates for you. You have to find that this work is hard and it takes consistent dedication to do it. So you need to find what that motivation is, the inspiration to keep doing it and move through the pain and the comfort of this work. So how can we support people to connect to that?
I think, it is just like exercising in a way. So first is that these systems are lodged into our bodies. They are lodged into our consciousness, and they are very harmful. I mean, even for white people, what the history of colonialism and domination, it's also painful. And, in the same way that I am, I'm learning how to run on trails. And sometimes I feel pain, I'm adapting, but it's muscles that I haven't experienced before. And I think that part of it is learning that there will be pain and discomfort, but that's part of it. And, as human beings, I think it's about embracing the full emotions of what transformation brings and just recognizing that a lot of the discomfort comes because you are challenging something that not only lives in your body, lives in your consciousness, but that's exactly it. As you're feeling discomfort, as you're feeling something, that's exactly what it's meant to do. And that's really, I believe it's your empathy, it's your inner sense of justice that makes you outraged. And that's something to hold. And I think there's various spaces to hold it. I really encourage people to create support networks, to have, systems of support for accountability. I love that a lot of white people are working with their white people. I'm working with my Latinx people because Latinx people, we have our own history of anti-Blackness in our communities. But I encourage people to not do this work alone.
Yeah, I think that's key. I think, building on what Favianna said, we need habits to drive change, not actions. And I think each of us in our own individual journeys can actually think about the habits that we've identified that maybe are actually not doing the work of practicing anti-racism or practicing allyship, and challenge those habits, whether it's the news sources that we default to understand what's happening, whether it's maybe building a willingness to challenge the media at face value. And even whether that's the willingness to challenge our friends and our family when they're saying things that we know are not evidence-based and which we know could actually be perpetuating bias in our social circles. I think all of these things are micro changes that scaled up across a whole family, a whole town, a whole community are what actually dismantle the system over time. And one of the other things I was going to say was actually to start seeing the interconnectedness, not only of like the human experience and the human condition, but all of the issues that we are frustrated with, because they are related, right? One of the frustrating realities of this version of capitalism is the fact that we have systemic racism and all these other systemic versions of isms, but it's also the fact that the planet is dying, right? These are not separate things. These are totally interconnected things. So fair enough, you might not still be fully bought into the plight of Indigenous people. That's okay, but are you bought into the plight of your planet? Because, ultimately when we're fighting for justice, we're fighting for the same thing. So I think the more that people start to understand that we are all participating in this human experience together, using the same planet, sharing the same resources, the more we'll start to understand, as long as anyone is facing injustice, I too am facing injustice. And I think, bringing that connectedness together can be so powerful.
Yeah, I want to add, I really love how you're framing it, Abadesi. Am I saying your name correctly? Okay, great. I think, an easy way to remember it is that the system of colonialism and capitalism has allowed us to exploit particular bodies. And those bodies have been throughout history, Black bodies, Indigenous bodies, animal bodies. I mean, and the earth itself as a body, the oceans, the things that live in there. And it's really about recognizing that we can't continue to exploit bodies in the way we do. The reason we have a fossil fuel problem is because we have allowed for the oil industry to go into communities of color, Black, Indigenous communities. If we would have said, no, Black, Indigenous people deserve to have their land and clean water, we would have shut down the fossil fuel industry years ago. So it's so critical to understand that our planetary crisis, climate crisis, is the result of white supremacy and colonialism. We can't disconnect them. And so absolutely, we are in an interconnected reality now. And for those who we have to appeal, to your sense of loving the planet, I can tell you it begins with the exploitation also of the reproductive body, right? Mm-hmm. Bodies with uteruses have been at the core of the climate crisis, the exploitation of the bodies that we consider life-giving, even, the drilling of our Mother Earth, all of that is rooted in patriarchy. And so I am so excited also that we are the generation who can imagine a different way. I think it is a huge gift that we are here and that we could break the cycle.
I love that. And I think we'll go on to that in just a minute. I just have one other question around this topic, which is, we work so closely, like all of us individually in our sectors and in the work that we do, with other organizations who might not be ready to meet us where we are working in. How do we manage that tension between collaborating with organizations and also respecting and understanding the narratives of the community which we serve?
I think, that's a super easy question. Here we go. I've recently become quite obsessed with this idea of adaptive leadership. And it's this idea of how do you lead when the problem isn't obvious, when everyone has a different interpretation of what the most urgent part of this problem is. And also when each person has, a different risk appetite, different set of priorities. To your point, how do you bring people together and tackle something like climate change, racial justice, whatever that might be? And what this school of thought asks us to do is actually listen with compassion to the different needs of people in the group and then apply all of the tools within our power. And by tools, I mean apply that lens of privilege, apply that lens of systemic oppression, apply that lens of intersectionality, and be willing to experiment. One of the things that stalls progress is that people are impatient for the solution. They want the silver bullet that's going to fix hundreds of years of injustice and turmoil. And because we're so impatient for that fix, we actually don't put any energy into the path that will get us towards that fix. And the path that gets us towards that fix is experiments driven by what we know, across our stakeholder group. What resources do we have available? Let's just try. The problem with a lot of the companies that I work with, for example, there isn't even a willingness to try something different unless there's a guarantee of success. Now, how can we apply that principle to the pioneering work of striving for equity in multicultural organizations, multicultural societies? I'm okay with trying and failing. I'd rather try and fail with this initiative or this program, this project, than do nothing at all. So, my advice to everybody is listen to everyone involved, find the next best step based on what you've heard, and see that as an experiment. It doesn't have to be the solution. If it works, great, it's the solution. You can call it that. If it fails, it was an experiment.
Individuals and their stories have a tremendous amount of power. And I really want to stress that, because I think sometimes that people forget their sphere of influence. And we can organize, but also we can propose ideas and frameworks and do so within our organizations and our companies. And I think it's really around finding the courage to do it. And, for me, I'm from the Bay Area, so it's all innovation over here. And a lot of what is talked about in the whole world of, the .com world is around embracing failure. What you said, Abadesi, is embracing failure, but also being willing to try different ways, understanding that the same steps have actually led us to the same outcome. And so how do we get curious about changing something? I think, again, as a person who's part of a group, is bringing up how are we doing this differently? If we were to, engage people of color experts in this, might we be reaching people who we haven't reached before, and how amazing and powerful it would be for our product or idea to reach more people. Like, I actually think it always has the potential of being a win-win. We just have to get over the fear factor.
Yeah, I mean, both of you have got projects that kind of speak to that on the ground. And I wonder if you can tell us about any of those examples that work well. I'm thinking specifically, Favianna, you've got the Disruptors program, which I think is a really interesting idea of getting new voices into a room. And even Abadesi with Techish is a really great example of hearing different stories and narratives. Could you speak to any successes that you would say about that collaboration process?
So first, it's about finding where are the places we can intervene that are going to have the most success. And for us, in California, where I live, the capital of content creation is here. I mean, the things we make in Hollywood are exported throughout the world. What would it be like to ensure that we have disabled storytellers, transgender storytellers, immigrant storytellers? And that's what the program, The Disruptor, does. It helps emerging screenwriters pitch their idea, refine their idea, and really know how to operate in Hollywood. Now, to our surprise, again, I mean, culture is changing all the time. The pandemic changed culture. We are in a moment of racial reckoning. That's changing culture. And what we were able to do is actually get the attention of a lot of television executives, because the reality is, I mean, this is just the future. The train is moving towards racial justice. It's moving. It's about how you're going to get on that train. The reality is, it's about how you're going to get on our train. So we support them through a fellowship, through paid opportunities, because I always think that people who are from marginalized backgrounds deserve to be paid and valued for the tremendous expertise they bring. And we propel them. And so I think that it's about pilots. You don't have to start with big initiatives. You can start with small experiments, but always in a way that respects and honors the value of the person or the community's lived experience, and it's not extractive, but it's actually more regenerative.
I love that. Such fantastic tips there. One of the things that's really worked for me with my podcast, Techish, is to try to find a way to have the conversation in a surprising way, a different way, or a delightful way. What I often find, particularly in tech circles and business circles, is that as soon as, racism or any other ism comes in, it's almost like sucking all the joy, curiosity, and fun out of the space. Suddenly everyone's expecting to be lectured on something or, told what they're doing wrong. And the reality is, there's so much value to happen just by creating space for conversation and reflection to happen. And one of the things that we try to do with Techish is exactly that. It's a weekly podcast. We're laughing as we're recording, even though we're talking about the increasing gap between the richest and the poorest, and the role that tech plays in perpetuating that. One of our most popular episodes was actually about virtual influencers. So these are games companies, based near where Favianna is, Silicon Valley, creating so lifelike avatars of Black women, people of color, partnering those avatars with brands, building cult followings on social media. A lot of individuals following these individuals who are posting things like #BLM didn't even realize they're not real. And didn't even realize that they're not members of these communities, and they didn't realize that behind them are a team that's representing the dominant group. So, it's really important for us to spark a conversation about what that means in terms of creating wealth, value, what it means in terms of brands aligning with certain social movements in an authentic way. But we can do it, over the course of a podcast where we're almost inviting each other to kind of say like, hey, do you follow this person on social? Did you know they're not a person? So, it's a bit of a Trojan horse tactic, but I think as much as we can find different ways to spark the conversation and invite people to participate in the conversation can just be really, really impactful too. I'm not saying it always has to be fun, but sometimes it can be.
I so agree. And I really love the idea. And these feel like the sort of like headlines from what we're talking about, which is about finding the joy in this work. It's about, imagining new futures. It's about feeling hopeful and possible about what is to come. And also about making us aware that there's a whole new world of innovation, of ideas, of stories, of pure joy to be discovered when we are invested in being part of that process. So if we move along and we kind of continue that forwards, I'm really interested to think about what yes looks like for us. Like, what do we imagine either in our personal professions or our culture sectors? What does, the vision look like or feel like in whatever way you want to interpret that question?
Well, I'll talk about it. This is actually something I work on a lot. First, I am a daughter of Afro-Peruvians, and I was born here in the United States. And I feel a lot of times when we talk about Latinx people, basically people from the continent, North and South America, who were invaded by the Spaniards and the Portuguese, we don't talk about the history of slavery. We don't talk about the genocide of indigenous people. And for me, it's time to approach those stories. I remember when actually the movie Avatar came out, and I was like, wow, there's so much missing from this. So for me, when I imagine what a future looks like, I want to talk about what happened on this continent, the pain that happened on this continent 500 years ago, and what that has led to today and how we heal from it. Because now we know that those who are protecting the biodiversity of the planet, a lot of folks are here on this land base who are protecting the Amazon, who are protecting very important sites that will determine our environmental future. And for me, I'm also really excited about making content about consent. We know we don't want sexual assault. I mean, Me Too is a global movement, but what does healthy sexual relationships look like? What does consent look like? I want to see rom-coms about it. I want to hear podcast songs, right? I mean, talk about the 80s songs and like stalking. What's up with the new way of consent? And how do we date in today's world? What about those of us who want to move away from the binary? Like where are the romantic comedies, the books for us to read?
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I want to be a part of that future.
Me too.
I think, yes, for me, looks like a willingness to shift focus from individual loss or individual sacrifice to like what we gain as a community of humans and as a society. I often find myself, let's say during a diversity workshop, putting a lot of attention on one specific individual's realization that they have privilege, and almost in that realization, starting to understand the loss that comes with their duty of being an ally and being an activist. And, I do think it comes back to this scarcity mindset that this version of capitalism has trained us to have, where we see every change or every gift as a loss of something. And actually, that's not really how this works. Favianna's already alluded to the fact that these existing systems of oppression are also in some ways oppressing the people of the dominant groups, right? And we see that, right, with research around mental health. We see that, the numbers of people taking their lives. There's so many things that show us that this isn't working really for anyone, except maybe a small minority of people at the very, very top of the pile. So, yes, for me, is a willingness to zoom out of that personal discomfort, that sense of confusion, that sense of guilt, and remember what's really at stake here, what we're really striving for. It's about more than just us as individuals. My work is about more than just me. The fruits of my labor I'm not going to probably enjoy in my lifetime, but I'm setting the course so that the ball keeps rolling for everyone that takes it forward. So yeah, I think that's really what yes looks like to me. And once you are able to get into that mindset and think of how liberating it's going to be when we can challenge these existing constraints and challenge these systems of oppression, I think it'll be a lot easier for people who are representing dominant groups, people who have a lot of privilege, to recognize the power of passing that privilege on to someone else. I think about that a lot. Okay, I'm asked to a speaking engagement. Well, actually, who's another woman of color who hasn't had that many speaking engagements that I can pass this on to? I might be approached to join an advisory board. Actually, you know what? There are a lot of talented other Black, Asian, underrepresented women who maybe don't get asked this because they don't have my profile. And I'm happy to say no to you so that you can say yes to them. And that is the yes that I want. It's actually me saying no so that others can get that yes. Love it.
I love that idea. I mean, the things I hear when you guys both speak is about the pride of making opportunities for everyone, the pride of kind of sharing out the wealth, the idea that one for one is not one less for somebody else. I think that's a really important idea to think about. And also this idea of moving away from guilt and shame as motivators to do anything. And I really hear that even around, sexual liberation, and even the sector around inclusion is majority female in Bristol, in the sector that I work at. And it's still so bound in this idea of duty and responsibility and all those things. And I think even the liberation of joy and pleasure being part of a woman's agenda still feels like such untrodden territory in the conversations that we're having around equity and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think that patriarchy and actually capitalism require pain-oriented narratives. So, for example, a narrative that I got growing up, because my family, both my parents were immigrants, was you got to work hard. You delay pleasure and joy until you work hard, which is just, how convenient is that for capitalism, that we basically use our bodies in the service of a system that's actually not going to take care of us. It's just such a lie. And so the pain-oriented narratives are such a core part of who we are. I mean, also even with sex, with sexual freedom, it's so much of the messages that I got growing up were pain-oriented, like close your legs, don't get a disease, don't get pregnant. And those are actually not effective. As human beings, we can be more moved by possibilities, right? And so I encourage people to move from pain-oriented narratives to pleasure-oriented narratives, and thinking about how much more wonderful is it going to be that I consume TV shows and movies that represent who's on this planet, and not just my little, segment of the world, or people who look like me. And how much joy am I going to get from actually unlearning these systems that have harmed me and my ancestors, and actually getting into right relationship. And so I do think just think about what are the messages that you got that were pain oriented, and think about how you might flip them on their head and instead move towards a joy oriented framework.
Yeah, I've just listened to you probably already know the Nat Ministry, but I just listened to a podcast about the power, the resistance of rest. And I think that's so interesting in our industry, specifically at this creative tech, when we're in the business of new, we're always, working hard around the clock. It's still kind of transitioning from this idea of work hard, play hard ethos, and actually the value of rest, of taking time to restore and to repair and to not being the first one in, the last one out, and how powerful that can be. And, it not only for our own preservation, but also in terms of the way that we interact with each other and how much capacity we have, extra bandwidth when we allow ourselves, like you were saying, Abadesi, to say no to something so that we can be prepared to say yes to others. It's radical. With that in mind, I wanted to know what sustains you, because this work falls heavily on the shoulders specifically of historically marginalized communities, and in my view, specifically on women. So what do we do as people working in this sector to restore ourselves?
Wow, that's a great question. I always think of Angela Davis, because I remember she spoke at Afropunk a few years ago, and she said that, we have to sustain ourselves for advocacy work. It's about longevity, and it can feel hard, honestly, like being in the trenches. You hear stories every day that make you wish all of this was fixed yesterday. And it's so deeply connected to our identity, the work that we do, that it's actually really hard to separate your work and your mission from your life and yourself. But at the same time, it is really important to, we're all, sisters, partners, friends, and it's really important for us to, almost be selfish. For me, just trying to act in a way that favors myself feels like selfishness, because of being socialized in patriarchy and because of, coming from African and Asian cultures where the role of a woman is to serve and please others. And, my needs come after everyone else's have been served. So for me, it's actually been a real journey of self-compassion. And, the journey is ongoing. It's definitely not fixed. But one of the transformative parts in this journey has actually been changing my relationship with mental health. I grew up in a house where we didn't really talk about illness unless it was physical, and that's certainly like a cultural thing. But even in the UK where I live, there's still so much work to do. A lot of people are only willing to get counseling or therapy when they're facing some seriously scary thoughts. And I think one of the things that's really helped me is actually asking for that help and getting that help and having someone professionally trained to support me and help me. And I'm really trying to address the cycle of burnout. I hate that I've normalized burnout, and I work in an industry and live in a society where that's a normalized thing, working to the point of exhaustion, taking a break, resetting, coming back to it all over again. This is something that I'm actively working on. I'm taking mental health days off work. I'm taking time off screens. I'm taking time to be in nature. I'm taking time to play, to not be productive, but just to live and be present. And I, had a friend recently remind me, rest is a right, not a reward. But many of us are still treating it like that, like we're waiting for the opportunity to do it. So yeah, I'm personally just working on trying to build, habits driven by self-compassion, to seek help when I need it, really, prioritize my mental health, and absolutely, see rest as my right, not a reward.
Ditto everything you said. I am doing the same, and it's a big unlearning, because I was, groomed in this way as the daughter of immigrants. And the reason I think I'm successful is because I've been like a workhorse my whole life. And now I'm understanding the impacts it's had on my body, on my mental health, even on my ability to have friendships and relationships. I'm learning how to rebuild intimacy, how to be vulnerable, how to ask for help. I really love this quote by Audre Lorde, who says, Audre Lorde, Black queer feminist, American feminist. She said, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It's self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. So self-preservation, this is so important. I live in a highly polluted community. I live in a community with high rates of police brutality. My neighborhood has the highest rates of COVID in my municipality. And I absolutely have to care for myself because the government does not care for people like me. And even though I'm successful, I still live with things like pollution, fossil fuel emissions that are beyond my control. So I really believe that caring for myself means I'm a vegan so that I don't participate in animal agriculture, which is overwhelmingly affecting Latinx workers, as we all saw the awful rates from COVID infections. I make sure and have movement in my day so I can be in my body and not just, I reject the colonial notion that it's all about our intellectual. I do a lot of body work to heal. I garden so that I can rebuild my relationship to the soil. I have a lot of plants, as you can see here, because it's good for me to care for something, another species. And honestly, when, in me, helping to care for a plant, I realize, oh, wow, look, I'm bringing something new. I'm bringing new life. I'm manifesting new life, and it's a great, process for my own mental health. And then, of course, I do a lot of art. I encourage people to really find ways to express themselves. You don't have to be a professional. You can take a dance class. You can sing. I think the expressive arts are so important because just as, we're in these intense situations where we might be working on anti-racism, you kind of got to shake it out. You know what I mean? You got to decolonize the body too. You got to let it out. And I think that's movement. That's movement. And so include a very holistic in your political work, message to everyone, include movement in that, include ways so that your body can also remember and release.
I love that. Can we come over? That sounds beautiful. Yes, brilliant.
Please.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's making me think a lot of this. This is an interesting point that I'm thinking about, which is so often organizations or culture sectors, you were saying, Abadesi, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. And this is a corner that I need to do that work into, and in terms of the social justice and the motivation to do the work, I'm all in. But in terms of that restorative healing, in terms of that's my corner, that's my uncomfortable corner. So there's work for everyone to be doing, and it takes different forms, but we all have to show up and find those corners that we need to kind of develop a little bit more into. We are about the end of the time. So this is sort of like final phrases. If there is anything that is really inspiring you that you want to share with our audiences, or if there's a takeaway that you'd like to leave with folks, kind of like a last moment to share anything that is relevant.
Yeah, I just want to remind everyone that, one-off actions aren't really going to create lasting change. So, we need to stop looking for the actions and we need to stop asking for them. It's really the changing of our habits that's going to create the systemic shift that we want. So, really start thinking about the habits you have day in, day out, whether it's what you're consuming, whether it's who you're talking to, who you're listening to, the voices that you give airtime to, and think about how those little habits can be changed to create a more representative picture of reality in your life so that you can be better informed to fight for inclusion.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that one because I actually think the culture you're exposed to is significant. It shapes your brain. So look at your feed, follow Black feminists, follow Indigenous leaders. In the movies you consume, if they are more than 75% white, don't consume them. Really, really make an effort for your television and film intake to be diverse. Think about the musicians you're supporting, the books you're reading, right? And widen that scope and really think about what the visual culture you're engaging with, the things you're listening to, what you're consuming in your cultural diet is to change it. And I can assure you, it's going to open up new doors for you because you're going to be amazed at really just how much our culture hides from us. And then finally, as I would say, look at your own friend network and look at one thing that a fat activist asked me once, and I thought it was a really important question, is thinking about how many different bodies I include in my friend circle and how I am in making inclusive spaces for people of all bodies and abilities to be in relationship with me. And I realized that I need to shift that. I want to shift that, and I want to even consider accessibility needs. I want to consider how, I ran a camp for many years at Burning Man, and we merged with a deaf camp. And I realized that so much of the ways that non-deaf people have conversations are actually, they don't allow for deaf people to participate. And so I realized how to have 3-person conversations where you have to enunciate your words and be able for the person to see what you're saying. And obviously you can't interrupt or talk over. And so I think that the more experiences you have to widen your own circle is going to have lasting impacts, because again, it does come down to those personal relationships.
I love that. And that encouraging message to do that beyond the need. So just because you think you need to diversify your recruitment strategy or your policy, don't let that be the only time that you invest in widening that net. I think that's really strong. And you, like you said, Favianna, you won't even believe how rich that will be, and how much you'll learn, and how much you'll feel more connected to this cultural conversation.
Yes.
Thank you both so much. I wish we could just stay here forever and have all the conversation. I actually wish we could all be in one room, but this has been really, really enlightening. Abadesi, how can people keep in touch with the work that you're doing?
Oh, yes, the benefit of being the only Abadesi. Just follow me at Abadesi on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'd love to connect and keep talking about this topic.
And the same for you, Favianna?
Yeah, I also have a very unique name. I'm Favianna on Twitter, where I post a lot is on Instagram, and I'm Favianna1 with the number 1. And then folks can also check out my website, favianna.com.
Thank you so much for joining me in the conversation. I wish you both a lovely evening and day. And I can't thank you enough. It's been wonderful.
Yes, thank you so much, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.
People, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sure that you understand what it means to be on mute. And so it has happened. It was bound to happen at some point in time. But there you go. I was so deeply moved by that conversation. Thank you so much. I think that this is a perfect point for us to pause for our lunchtime. I just want to give a reminder and say that if you want to view our videos, they will be online at some point in the future after they are edited. And also, if you want to stay with us during the lunchtime, we are still going to be running some talks. 2 of them will be going on in the expo, one of them being hosted by Corinne Stewart, which is the introduction to the Data Zine session. The next will be Making Sense of Data, which is going to be led by our Jazz again. And the third is the lunchtime talk in Pervasive Media Studio, which is going to be hosted by one of our very own data fellows, Kathy Hind. Kathy is going to be talking about listening to water. So with that being said, I'm wishing you all a fantastic lunch break. Please join us back at 1:45 and we will pick up our program again. Please don't leave us. We promise that we have still a jam-packed program of very fantastic talks and panels. So wishing you all a great lunch period.